All right, let's get rolling. Thanks everyone for making the time to be here this morning. This is a very special event and I think is going to be very generative and catalytic. I'm the Brain Health Fellow at the Baker Institute, and the Brain Health Fellow is jet lagged, so his brain health is not going so good, but please bear with me. I'm already Australian, so I'm already at a handicap, but I'll do my best this morning. Just before we get started, let's do some housekeeping. It's important that we go through a couple of things before we get into the fun and into the action. So this is an educational event. We're not here today at all to lobby or anything like that, strictly for education and for your interests. And thank you very much to the Congressman for coming in your formal capacity. Secondly, we are going to do a Q&A today, but let's do it at the end. I'll make some remarks initially, then Nathan and the good Congressman will do a fireside chat, and after that, you're more than welcome to ask some questions. So get your thinking hats on in that respect. And finally, we ask that everyone come in good faith today and in good spirit, and let's be civil and enjoyable. We know that there's tensions these days, but so let's keep that to ourselves and come here in good spirit. And so thank you for that. But before we introduce the Congressman and Nathan ask him some questions and we get into the Q&A, I wanted to make some remarks about a vision that we're incubating here at the Baker Institute. It's a vision for an American brain strategy, specifically an American brain grand strategy, which has a sort of some military strategy thinking behind it, which the Congressman might appreciate. So I want to share with you this vision that we have been incubating, and let's talk about it more today. We need to recognize that in the US, we're facing an escalating issue of brain and mind issues, neurological conditions, mental health conditions like depression, schizophrenia, anxiety, Alzheimer's disease. These are big issues. Here are some statistics for you. The lost income in the United States of the collective of these issues is $350 billion a year. This is huge, a huge drain on our economy and an impact to our economic security. That equates to 1.6% of the US economy. So this is really substantial stuff. And would you believe that this is growing at a rate of about 5.3% a year? So that's why today is important, that we think about innovation, technology, and then also policy. How are we going to get a handle on this? We need to kind of think different. We need to think a bit radical, because this stuff is escalating. And it's important to recognize that let's think about brain health today. Let's think about going beyond discussions of deficit, of how depressed are you, how impaired are you, the sort of baggage of psychiatry and neurology, which are very important disciplines. But let's today think about that stuff, but also think a little bit more on the positive side as well. Let's talk today about the creativity of the brain, the resilience of the brain, the adaptability of the brain, the entrepreneurial nature of the brain. Let's sort of paint a more balanced picture of the deficits and the strengths. That's what I want to encourage you to do today. It's important to recognize that we also want to not just talk about the loss of productivity. I mentioned those big numbers at the start. Let's talk about how we grow productivity. Let's talk about how we grow American social cohesion to weave our communities back together that are so frayed. Let's talk about how we grow startups and arts and creativity and all these good things and good American innovation, the stuff that America is best at, the stuff why a guy from Australia came to America to be around all of the electricity and the creativity that you guys have to offer. Let's talk about how do we power our brains to do that. We also need to recognize that we're in the midst of great power competition. America is not on an island. It's kind of on an island, but we're not on an island in the global sense with geostrategy and geopolitics. We are competing against non-democratic nations, and the brain power of America is critical to outcompeting these near-peer and non-democratic competitors. So let's also talk about this today and flesh this out a little bit. What is the national security implications and national competitiveness implications of the American brain? How do we build the American brain so that we can, basically do better, so that the best democracy in the world, which is the United States, can continue on strong in the coming decades? if we don't, as an Australian, again, would say this, we need American leadership in the world. And so that's why I'm here and wanting to support and think about this framing of building the American brain to build economic productivity and national security. It's been wonderful for me personally as a policy strategist in the last few years to unpack this stuff, the role of the American brain in powering our democracy, powering our economy, talking about this stuff with people like Admiral Bill McRaven, General John Allen, Colonel Jeffrey Ling, and people from West Point and DARPA. We've really done our best in an academic sense to engage with experts in the United States to really think this stuff through. We need to have a comprehensive and integrated approach to this brain building in America. We can't just have scientists doing their things and engineers doing their things and doctors doing their things and school teachers doing their thing and they're not all talking together. We need to think of a way to stitch this all together. So again, it's why it's great to have the congressman here to think about how do we weave together an integrated American strategy. So this is where brain capital comes into play. Brain capital is what we're leading here at the Baker Institute. Brain capital is an asset of our brain health, our brain skills that is critical to the American economy. Brain capital we want people to think of as important as GDP, as important as road and bridge infrastructure. So that, and brain capital is literally being led out of the Baker Institute. And so we're again happy to share this with the congressman and get his perspectives on what he thinks about it. Also, of course, I should say at this point that the Meadows Mental Health Policy Institute is a co-collaborator of this event. So thank you very much to John Snook, the Chief Policy Officer of Meadows. Meadows is a great Texas-based mental health policy institute based out of Dallas that's been integral to this as well. So we need, in this comprehensive strategy for the American brain, weave together academia, hospitals, schools, private sector, philanthropy. It all needs to come together. That's why public policy is so important, because without public policy, we can't coordinate public and private together. So it's kind of fun when you think about how would you leverage the unique assets of the United States for this American brain strategy. We have Texas entrepreneurship, Texas, like the wildcat of spirit. We have Hollywood's expertise in what Hollywood does with storytelling. We have Silicon Valley's expertise in tech. How are we going to leverage that? Wall Street's expertise in finance. They can do all sorts of things for good and for bad in Wall Street. How do we get them to focus on brain stuff, brain investing in startups around neurotechnology? And then we also have in the United States supercomputing expertise, which I know the congressman is an expert in. We have big philanthropy and risk-taking philanthropy that's important to people like Gates and such. And then finally, we have the best military strategists in the world. And if we're going to sort of take aim at these brain challenges, what better inspiration than sort of military strategy to think about what is a common goal that we can mobilize our economy and our citizenry towards one thing. So all of these things, again, make America very unique. So in conclusion, with regards to this brain strategy, it's not an academic thing. This is very pragmatic. We work every day with government relations at Rice in sort of thinking through this strategy. We're working with people across the country. This is very pragmatic. It's very public-private and very policy-driven. And so there's no better person, of course, to talk about this with than Congressman Luttrell. You guys have probably seen his pretty amazing and unique CV. He, I think, is singular in the world in the different disciplines and experiences that you bring together, and I mean that sincerely because I talk to politicians around the world, and your bio is very, very impressive and unique. Congressman Luttrell is a neuroscientist. He has a master's degree in neuroscience. He has lived experience with brain injury, so can talk about it from a personal perspective. He's a retired Navy SEAL, so has this kind of national security and combat experience, and is also an expert in supercomputing. So he's bringing all these things together. So as you're thinking about your questions at the end, keep this stuff in mind. And we're very lucky that he now operates at the federal level in politics, in neuroscience, running co-chairing the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus, and involved in other committees like the Armed Services Committee and Veterans Committees as well. I do have a hypothesis for the congressman that I think is interesting. Perhaps one solution for the gridlock in Congress is if we have more neuroscientists in Congress. And we're not allowed to talk about the brain health of politicians specifically, which is a tinderbox, but imagine if our politicians in the US, and I can never be one as an Australian, unfortunately, but imagine if we had like half of them as neuroscientists. What would this do to our policy making and our strategy in America? So you can answer that and see what you think. Formally now, and just to conclude, Congressman Luttrell has a bachelor's in psychology from Sam Houston State University, so that's cool thing number one. Secondarily, I mentioned master's degree in neuroscience from UT Dallas. That's the second cool thing. You're an entrepreneur in business and in policy. Congressman led the establishment of the AI and Technologies Office at the US Department of Energy, which is quite fascinating. That was before his political career. And as I said, is involved in 3 committees: Armed Services, Homeland Security, and Veterans Affairs. And then the third one is the Congressional Neuroscience, the fourth one is the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus. So very interesting span that you have. As I said, singular in the world. And I want to leave you with one point. I'm a new father, so I can make dad jokes. I have a 5.5-month-old baby girl. So I think that Congressman Luttrell is not a wildcatter in the American spirit, but a brain wildcatter, someone that is actively thinking about entrepreneurial ways to boost brain health and brain power of Americans. So that's the label of brain wildcatter. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nathan Cook, our Senior Director of Government Relations, and Congressman Luttrell to say some remarks and get into our fireside chat.
A very eloquent opening. You touched on so many important points, and I'm gonna drop down a level from the congressional level and speak to you as a neuroscientist. All the brilliant minds that are sitting in the room with us today, and then all of our colleagues across not only the state, the nation, but the globe. It's a very awkward space that we're still trying to figure out how this gelatinous substance between our ears functions. It contemplates thought. It contemplates the contemplation of thought. But how does this work? And as neuroscientists, neurologists, and clinicians abroad trying to master this last bastion of uncharted territory, what does that look like? And you spoke of weaving and connecting academia, hospitals of higher education, so on, and what that looks like. Because the neuroscience space, unfortunately, it's very siloed, or can be siloed. And while I was in academia, educating myself on the brain, and then moving into the Department of Energy, I was laser focused in on brain science while at the Department of Energy. If you want to kind of break those numbers out and do the math on that, it's very confusing. I was confused myself in the beginning, but the secretary wanted us to utilize artificial intelligence to work algorithms to understand scenario-based brain outputs, okay? And we did that. And now at the congressional level, on the Neuroscience Caucus, my colleague, Mr. Blumenauer from Oregon, is a very passionate, very driven man in this space. And there are a handful of us, but again, Washington, D.C. as a whole, unless you really get into the books and understand what academia is trying to teach us, because when I was in grad school, what I learned about the brain and neuroscience has changed. That was 10 years ago. And every single day, we move and we take another aggressive step forward, is what we want. But I have to be able to communicate to the colleagues in the lower chamber, up to and across exactly where we're trying to go, which we are still trying to figure out, but where we exist in the accomplishments of Rice University and the University of California school system and the Texas state systems and the advances that they are making every single day, because the net is very wide. If we're dealing with cognitive instabilities or depression, anxiety disorder, or traumatic brain injury, or post-traumatic stress, or post-traumatic stress disorder, 2 very different things. Now the scientists and neurologists and our students of academia are trying to not only trim that down to a linear movement, but also find what's most appropriate to treat those issues. Again, we still have no idea how this beautiful thing between our ears works and functions. We have ideas what certain areas of the brain control certain things, but at the end of the day, until we crack that proverbial nut, we won't. And that's why it's so important when I talk to the younger generation. And neuroscience, I became a neuroscientist because I had a brain injury. And when I was traveling the country to all the premier institutes of higher learning and academia in neuroscience or cognitive rehabilitation, I wasn't really finding the answers that I wanted, so the best way to do that is to educate yourself. If I could look back and say, was I a fool to get into academia and neuroscience, I would say yes. After my undergraduate degree into the military, I never thought I would go back to academia to study the brain. But so happy that I did, because it's the adventure that we need. And I tell the younger generation, it's like, this is the way of the future. We have so many brilliant minds that work in social media aspects. They're on the digital web. The advances of technologies on the keyboards that we can all touch, taste, hear, and smell are fascinating. They're changing the world. One day, one of the babies that are walking around this room is going to figure out how the brain works. All of our computational systems in the United States of America, think of the power of that. All those aggregated data systems that control what we touch, what we put into the web. If you were to plug a scientist told me this, I'm not making this up, this is not Morgan's opinion, I'm just telling you what I was told. A scientist that works at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, two of the fastest computers on the planet are at Oak Ridge National Laboratory, he's like, if you were to plug in a section of the brain the size of your pinky fingernail into this computer, it would crash it. That's how powerful this is. But yet we have not had the ability to open that door. And at my level, what I want to do is give you the opportunity to solve those problems. Give you the opportunity to open that door. Bring us together as a collective group of focused experts in the neuroscience space and say, how do we get there from here? But also be very careful. We don't want to outpunt our coverage. You do something foolish at my level, it could scuttle the whole thing. So we want to make sure that we have the brilliant minds together to do just that. And to your hypothesis, sir, I've been in plenty of tabletop discussions with a bunch of neuroscientists, and I got to tell you, it was one of the more challenging discussions. I don't know if neuroscientists in the congressional level would be a good idea, just to add to that. But thank you for having me here today. I've actually been looking forward to this, sharing my journey and just answering questions and seeing if we could, again, when it comes to this, it's who had that idea? Who just randomly woke up in the middle of the night and it's like, I think I know. Wrote it down, came to work and said, what about this? That's what this is about. That's neuroscience. That is figuring it out. And I will continue to do, I have to have something to do in my short time in Washington, D.C., which I was excited to get there. I'm very excited to leave eventually. And I will come back and continue my education. So thank you, Nathan, for having me. Thank you, Doc. And let's get started.
Congressman?
Yes, sir.
Good to have you here on the stage.
Absolutely a pleasure. I tried to get into Rice University. They weren't accepting applications in 1994, so I had to go to Sam Houston State instead.
Well, we have a shared story around
Harvard
that,
wasn't taking anybody either, so it was either Rice or Harvard.
Well, we're
I'm a proud Bearcat, by the way. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
Well, I went to Texas A&M, so the joke I like to make is, and this is old Southwest Conference rivalry days, A&M, Rice, UT. So the joke I make is, how does an Aggie get into Rice? You get a job there. That's basically it. That's the only way. Joke. Once they know you're an Aggie, that's it. But thank you so much for your time. I'm going to start with an icebreaker, actually, a little bit unscripted, but I may have asked you this question before. Your brother Marcus, you guys are identical twins.
Yes, sir.
You both served in the Navy SEALs. Very similar experiences. And not to put you on the spot, but why are you so much more handsome than he is?
So that's a great question. Because a lot of people tell me that I look like my brother, but I'm 7 minutes older, so he actually looks like me.
It's a fact, yeah.
It is. And my brother, he is an absolute war hero, Navy Cross recipient, and he is definitely a one-off in what he went through. And I can tell you, we look very similar. Matter of fact, most people don't know there's two of us, but there is. And the only reason I tell you that is because you can imagine how entertaining it is when somebody walks up to him with a political question, because he does not do politics at all. So I've had to kind of bat down some fires when he had to engage with some people in town. Anyway, I digress.
You ever get double booked and maybe ask him to stand in? That would be.
We did switch places in SEAL training.
Ah, here we go. Yep.
I was at Sam Houston State University. This is unclassified now. I was at Sam Houston State University, and he was actually in SEAL training, and I went out to visit him. And we switched. I did a full day of SEAL training as a civilian. I did, yeah, absolutely. True story. It's a long story. I won't tell you here, but we didn't get caught that day, but we did get caught. And I can assure you, the day that I showed up to SEAL training, it was, I had standing orders from the SEAL. I had to show up every morning to work wet and sandy. So everybody's running into work. I had to go jump in the ocean, get sandy, and come to work wet and sandy. The whole time I was there, which are always wet and sandy, so ain't no big deal. Anyway, so yeah, true story.
Wow. Well, actually, building on that, talking about your Navy service, you mentioned your TBI. And I think something that's really fascinating is you had your undergraduate degree in psychology prior to that, right?
I did, yes, sir.
Yeah. So I'm curious, talking about your TBI, do you consider yourself recovered? Do you still experience? What was your journey like with the traumatic brain injury?
I consider myself at 100%. Of course, you can scale that. And one of the discussions I have with leadership in the military is like we have no ability to understand what the scale looks like. Like I had no baseline assessment. My parents, we grew up I didn't have cognitive testing, I didn't have MRI scans, I didn't have blood testing, any of that. I didn't have a baseline assessment at 14, 15, 16 years old. It's like, hey, this is where you're at. All right, so as my time growing up as a young man with all the head injuries I had before I got into the military, what does that look like in variability? It'd be great to say, hey, here's where you were when you were perfect, here's where you were after your injury, and this is where we need to get you back to. And I feel like I traveled everywhere to go through as many treatments and I like to call it training, not treatment, because I wasn't sick or broke, I just got hurt, to get me back to what normal looked like. And I absolutely must have lost my mind because I ran for Congress. So there's something to be said about that. I don't know if I was back to normal, but as close as possible, given the substantial injury that I sustained.
Yeah, yeah. And what's also interesting is then what you did after that. So you started your undergraduate degree was in psychology, right. And then after your military service, you went and got an advanced degree in applied cognitive neuroscience. My question is, what drew you to that? I mean, obviously that's a very consistent thing. Like, why those areas of study?
All right, I'm gonna kind of blow the room up on why I got a psychology degree. This was back in the 90s, and you could say these things. You can't say these things now, but I'm going to say it anyway because he asked me the question. Psychology is where I kind of naturally gravitated to because there was no math, and the majority of the students that were in my classes were women.
It's an honest
I got
answer.
nothing else for you.
It's an honest answer.
I didn't really go to. I look,
Well, you're talking to a political science major, so
I took. Everybody knew I took I took political science at Sam Houston State 5 times, and I failed it every single time. Wow. I'm not saying I'm a bad congressman. I just wasn't very good at poli sci when I was an 18, 19, 20-year-old kid. Okay, and I have these conversations with my sons. I have a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old, and I talk to everybody. It's like I would, if looking back. And I loved psychology and philosophy. I took psychology and philosophy minor. I thought that was a good combination. I loved to people watch. I loved watch how the static or dynamic movement of individuals engaging with you. That intrigued me, even at that age. I tell folks, I don't necessarily think I went to school to get an education. I went to school to become a man. And when I was 18 years old, my daddy came to us the day we graduated high school. He was like, congratulations, you can't stay here. You can get a job, you can go to the military, you can go to school. Take your pick. Here's $300. And that was it. We were gone. And he's like, you got a week. That's how our father raised us. That's how I'm raising my sons. Hey, I taught you everything I can. You're out. So academia was very challenging for me. Graduating from Sam Houston State University is probably one of the hardest things I've ever done. I was not built for the classroom. I always had the intention of going to the Navy. I wanted to be a naval officer, and you had to have a college degree. I think I started out as a biology major, chemistry, went to criminal justice for a little bit, and about the 4th year as a freshman, the dean was like, hey, I can't keep you here. And I was like, every semester, I figured it out. I know what I'm doing. And I had to climb my way out of this proverbial hole that I had dug for myself, paying for school every semester. I'm shocked at how much I actually learned because of the struggle, but actually how much I took away from just studying psychology and human behavior and watching myself fail over and over and over again. And now I could share that with people. Whether or not they listen or not, I don't know. My sons definitely don't listen to me, but I'm trying.
But then extending into your advanced degree, was there something, was it your service that drew you to that, or was it building on your psychology degree?
So after my accident, after that particular accident, I went to University of Texas at Dallas to the Center for Brain Health, and Dr. Sandy Chapman.
Yeah.
We started our relationship there, and going through their program, she actually said to me, you really thrive in this space. This is me trying to put my head back together. After my accident and after coming out of rehab and post-concussive and everything, I was like, I'm trying to figure out what's happening here. Why am I acting like, what's going on? That back then, that was 2009. Think about how much we know about the brain now, but in 2009, it was even worse. So I was like, she said, hey, you're great at this. Have you ever thought about going back to school? And I was like, well, I promised my dean at Sam that I would never set foot back into academia again. I mean, he said, that's a great idea.
He had you write it down, like put it in writing?
I did. I mean, that was the greatest day of my life when I graduated college. But fast forward, because of the head injury and some physical injuries, the writing was on my paperwork. It's like, hey, look, we're going to have to put you on the bench. Yeah. And I was like, well, I'm not gonna do that. So I reached out to Dr. Chapman and said, hey, look, I'm still trying to figure out what's happening upstairs, my time in the military. What do you think about me coming to school at UT and getting a degree in neuroscience? And she's like, put in your application. And I did, and that was me really crawling down the rabbit hole to figure out exactly which way to go. Educating myself on, okay, hey, look, I understand and is this a dead end, or is this some ways we can continue to walk? And that's how I really I started out studying pediatrics, focused in on at lab work, pediatrics, then went to geriatrics. And Dr. Chapman's like, you're a veteran, you speak military. You speak that language. Why don't you associate yourself with the veterans in the community? Because we can't talk to them. They don't listen to what we say. And when they talk to us, I have no idea what that means. And I was very reluctant. I was like, no, I couldn't do pediatrics. You know, in the hospitals and babies would come in and some things happen to the babies that you don't want to put a former Navy SEAL, in a room with a parent that took advantage of a baby, right? That was bad. So I went to geriatrics, and that didn't gel. So I landed right back in the military space, and I thrived there ever since.
Yeah, well, it's fortuitous, I think, because now, I mean, it's really interesting, the coincidences that lead you to where you are. So now, as co-chair of the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus, I'm curious how that happens, right? Like you're just walking down the hall, you bump into Earl Blumenauer, and he's like, hey, you want to do this thing? Or, I mean, obviously.
He walked up to me on the House floor. Had no idea who he was. I was there for maybe 3 days. And he knew everything about me. And he goes, I want you to co-chair this with me. I was a freshman. I was still figuring out where my office was. And he's been the greatest man. We chat every single week. We have our Neuroscience Caucus meetings. We gather our thoughts and our minds. It is a beautiful thing. We just talk science. How do we fix us? And I never looked back. When he asked me that, I felt it in my bones. I was like, I can't believe somebody knows that I'm a neuroscientist. Even better that he wants to do this. Let's go. That's how that happened. He literally walked right up on the House floor to me.
That's amazing. Yeah. So working together with him, what do you guys hope to accomplish? What are the big policy directions that we might see emerging?
We're big in the psychedelic movement. Psychedelic treatment for post-traumatic stress, emotional, cognitive instabilities. Right. He and I engage very well with that. Yeah. Advancements in AI, treating brain injury, what that looks like. Because, again, very wide net. We don't want to miss anything. We also reach out to Rice University, the universities who have the new cutting edge research that's landed. Hey, bring them in. Let's bring everyone else. Let's hear about this, because that also helps us at the legislative areas. Like, okay, how can we connect these two? What's the trick here? Will A work with C without B, or do we need to bring B in and fix that problem? But this is the best way to say this. He's so open-minded, which is, you can't be closed-minded in the neuroscience space. You can't do that. When we're trying to work these problems, you can't run into a wall like we're done.
Yeah.
I mean, it's don't tell me no, tell me how to get to yes. And so we start to work, and we do that very well together.
Yeah.
And he's leaving.
Yeah.
I was like, you can't leave, you just got me here. I just got here, you're leaving, you can't just bail on me. So I'll have to find somebody who wants to engage in the Neuroscience Caucus, which is, it's a very small number.
Well, I think if anybody could draw another great co-chair, it would be you. And then, that'll just build upon the current success. I mean, I think that's a great legacy for him to kind of hand select you as being the next person to take that on.
I'm truly honored that he did it.
Yeah. Well, those two topics are interesting as well. First, I wanted to ask you about psychedelics. You've recently had a substantial hand in passing some legislation on that.
Yes.
Can you talk to us about that?
It was a very challenging piece of legislation to pass because it's the word psychedelics, and those of you in the crowd that you hear that word and you just turn your nose up. I did too. I still hate that word psychedelics, and if you roll the tape back to the 60s and 70s when psychedelics were a thing, and which was all predicated off of research, and then it gravitated into the wrong space, yeah. But now we find that psychedelic, and I'm not talking expansive. Let's just throw it out to the masses. This is a very clinically based, focused, researched, legislative movements. Like, hey, this is going to live in an academic space, in a medical space, and it has to be controlled. We're going to do control groups, and it's going to be very under the microscope. But I had to convince 434 members that this was a good idea. You can only imagine how challenging that was. I had to die. Morgan Luttrell and there was two others had to go, and I met with every member of Congress, most every member. Mr. Blumenauer helped me out quite a bit on it, and had to not only lay out the research, but I was speaking as a veteran who had they call it a journey, if you will. I went to Mexico. I did this. I went through the experience because I hit that crossroad. Like, where do we go from here? My wife was like, we're danger close. I don't have post-traumatic stress. I don't have post-traumatic stress disorder. I spent my entire career giving it to other people, and I was amazing at it. I just couldn't safe my weapon system and turn it down south. I couldn't let the teen guy life, the Navy SEAL, I couldn't let that go. I couldn't turn that loose. And I'm raising my babies like they're full-grown men in the community. You can't talk to a child like you talk to a grown man. You can't do that. Well, that's where I was at. So I took that journey. And it was so profound of an experience, which I would never tell anybody to do. If people come up to me often, it's like, hey, look, I'm somewhere where I can't go. How do I do this? I was like, don't do it. Absolutely, do not do this. If you find yourself with no other step forward, this may be for you. Period. It was the most miserable experience of my life. It was horrible, but it was profound. And I had done my research for years, making sure that I was a no guy. If you were to ask me any day of the week, I was like, absolutely not. We're not operating. But I had members that I served with that came back, and I mean buddies that, like, if they said 2 + 2 was 5, that's what we're going with. That kind of relationship. And I knew where they were, and then, it's like it was just a life-changing event, which it really was. So, and I've never supported any type of modality that I have not personally done, or sat down with the scientists and the clinicians and the doctors and read the research and saw the numbers, and then got the testimonials from the he or she that had gone through it. Yeah. And so with the psychedelic piece, I had to talk to members that lived in that time frame, and they were just absolutely no, we're not doing this. And then I said, hey, as a scientist, as a member of Congress, as a veteran, as someone who actually went through this, I'm telling you, we have to give this an opportunity. This is the way that we navigate away from the opioid problem that's killing everybody. If this may be, and it's a tool, okay? It's not the fix. It's a tool for the proverbial toolbox, something that could change someone's life. Not it will, but possibly it could. And that's what we're looking for. Yeah. And that seemed like a long answer to a short question, but I'm sorry.
No,
That's how that started, and we landed legislation in the House Armed Service, in the NDAA, National Defense Authorization, and in the VA. So the VA is looking at it as well, and it's still a challenge. We got $10 million to start the research, start the program itself, which was great, and I'm hoping just to continue to grow it.
That's fantastic. Yeah. That's real progress. Yeah.
If that comes off the rail, I don't have any better way to put it, because I've had people come to DC to sit with me, and they want to expand it very quickly. They want to reschedule the medications immediately, and my response is stop. Do not do that. If you do this, and something catastrophic happens at a large scale, it'll die again forever. Die again forever. That doesn't even make any sense. It'll die another 40, 50 years, and we'll have to revisit it. We don't want that.
Yeah, it'll set back the science.
It'll kick the science. I mean, when politics gets involved in science and medicine, it just blows it up. You know, you have to separate. Politics had no space in this. You know, these are the minds that I'm looking at out here, the ones that are saying this is how this needs to be done. So it's me saying, if you do this, you're going to kill us.
You also spoke about AI in your opening remarks. Your time at the Department of Energy had to be tremendously fascinating, being kind of handed that responsibility for standing up some work and research on that. You used AI to focus on some of these issues.
Yeah.
What did you learn?
Quite a bit. So the Secretary tasked me to stand up the Office of Artificial Intelligence in the cyberspace. What I had know nothing about cybersecurity, cyber threat, cyber risk, artificial intelligence. It wasn't my bandwidth. But he tasked me, said, go forward and do great things. So we stood up the Office of Artificial Intelligence and Technologies at the Department of Energy. But it was singularly focused at the time on brain health. So I traveled and built relationships with scientists, clinicians, and doctors across the country. The University of California School System, Dr. Jeff Manley. We partnered with the Zuckerberg Hospital next to Berkeley. And we utilized the computational power of the Department of Energy's supercomputers. So the Department of Energy houses all the nation's supercomputing capabilities, okay? And at the time that I was there, we activated the world's fastest, smartest computer, Summit. I might get these names back, it's been a while. Titan and Summit. So Titan was running, and then we activated Summit. And we aggregated brain health data, 5,000 healthy brains against thousands of damaged brains, okay? We wanted that control group. And we pumped all that information into the computer. And we wanted to do simulations on what the damaged brains look like compared to 5,000 healthy brains. And the problem set would have taken 100,000 scientists 300,000 years to compute, and the computer did it in 2.5 minutes. So the beauty part about that is we connected the lab with the traumatic brain ICU ward at Zuckerberg. So Dr. Manley, the neurologist, would send a damaged scan to the computer to compare against the healthy brains in a matter of minutes. Instead of, I don't know if anybody's had a brain injury, but you got to go in, you got to get an MRI. It could take a day or two to get all that back after all said and done. But now the neurologist sending the damaged brain image compared to the healthy brains comes back. He's in the traumatic brain ICU ward, he's like surgery, medications, not looking good, because the computer itself created a 4D image and showed depth and measurement, scalability of the possible injury. And then we take the information that what we know about the brain, where the neurologist, he or she, can say, we got to go and cut it. Or we have to do whatever doctors, I'm not a doctor, so whatever they need to do. So that's real-time diagnostics. That's moments instead of days and weeks. We all know with a head injury, we don't know what we don't know, right? You have a diffuse axonal injury, and you can't read that on MRI, but that computer can, a billion, it went exascale computing. That's a billion problems per second. I mean, think about that. That is absolutely, and that's what we were doing at the Department of Energy. So that's where AI now lives in the healthcare space. We surpassed Moore's Law, right? We have the capability, the computational systems have the ability to do things the human brain can't do. And if we utilize that, that's better for us.
Yeah. So you're hopeful that AI holds great promise for some of these challenges?
They'll be very, very, very careful with that question. AI holds great responsibilities. It can do great things for us. It can do bad things for us. Right? That's where we're literally on the starting line with what artificial intelligence is and is not.
Yeah, yeah. Would you advise similar caution to how you advise with psychedelics? That kind of, let's...
I would. The problem with that is artificial intelligence is adapting so quickly. Every half second of every minute of every hour of every day, artificial intelligence is expanding its growth rate.
Correct. Yep.
We have no idea what that looks like. We don't even know how to control it, more or less. We can't secure it. I talked to my colleagues in DC. I was like, the best way to, how do we actually control the functionality of artificial intelligence? You're going to have artificial intelligence do that. The human brain can't do that. You're going to have to turn the system on itself.
Yeah.
That's me saying this in 2024 on the 28th of March, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Next month it could be, I'm not talking singularity where the computer goes on its own program, but it's
moving fast.
It's impressive. It is impressive.
Well, you spoke about some of the work in California and some of the institutes established there. Texas, for a number of years, has been considering in the state legislature some large investments in brain health, brain research, mental health. What have you seen? I mean, is this something where California or other states are investing? Do you see other countries investing heavily in this type of research? What direction is the world taking in terms of these investments?
Great question, very tricky question. California, the functionality of California in brain health is very, very broad. The university, the Cal system itself is they're very laser focused on brain health. They utilize the laboratories to assist as well. Texas is up front and leading. And it's a shame we're pocketed, right? Imagine if we came together.
Yeah.
It's hard to put if there's a 1, 2, 3 who's leading, because there's so many variabilities of what exactly they're studying. That's okay though. I mean, as scientists, we keep our cards real close to our chests. A lot of times, you'd appreciate if we started sharing that. So I personally couldn't tell you, Washington University, Stanford University, the Cal system, the Texas system, schools out in Boston are doing some amazing things. Up in, did I say Washington? Washington's doing amazing things. And this is me kind of removed from it for a few years, but those are the ones that are popping into my head off the top. So if there's somebody in here that I've forgotten, forgive me. And then as far as country goes, our Middle Eastern brothers, our European brothers and sisters are functioning. Israel's functioning very well in the brain science space. You know that their war fighters statistically don't suffer the same cognitive distractions and disabilities that the American warfighters do because of their treatments in Israel.
I've heard.
I haven't been there yet, but I'm really wanting to. They know I want to come over there and see all that too.
Learn about that. Yeah.
It really is just, and to the state issue, we have to do that. I mean, that says something. Right. Like, hey, we need the world. Do you imagine? I said this to Dr. Chapman. I was like, could you imagine if we trained our brains as hard as we trained our bodies?
Yeah.
Like in the military, train the body every day, from the neck down. I mean, everything down from the neck down is just hammering it every single day, making it the most precision instrument. And then I can't tell you what I did for the neck up.
Yeah.
Let me make sure that my rounds are going. Just imagine if we started to incorporate full body dynamics in this.
Yep.
You can't take your head off at night and put it on the bedside table. They're connected.
My wife tried that. It didn't go well.
She tried to take it out.
It was my head. Yeah. It was.
So you have to fix them both.
Okay.
If this one's broken, it's going to drag this down. If this is going to drag this. Anyway.
Well, so we're going to transition to some Q&A from the audience. There's some microphones out there, but while you guys get ready, I want to encourage some questions, especially those that I've planted in the audience. Wink, wink. But while we do that, and folks, please feel free to line up. We'll call you out. One last question is, what do you think is the single most promising thing that's coming based on everything that's led into where you are now, what you've learned since joining the Congressional Neuroscience Caucus? Like, what do you see as being this thing that's just over the edge of the horizon, but it's coming that's really cool?
Computational systems in the brain. AI, machine learning. AI, machine learning, there's always that hyphen right in between.
Yeah.
What can we put into the distracted or damaged areas of the brain that will allow it to function as it once did?
Yep.
And you can expand that if you'd like. Can we, I'm sure you've seen, what can we put in the, you hear the word super soldier. You hear, how do we make this next extraordinary human being by putting computational systems inside the brain to make it function more effectively, efficiently? That seems to be, if you're really kind of looking at everything,
Yeah.
and how that space is growing. I mean, the cochlear implants, our Parkinson's treatments that we plan that fix their tremor issues. We're there.
Yeah.
I mean, the foot's in the door. Now it's just who creates that atom-sized program that can be implanted into the prefrontal area of the brain or somatosensory area of the brain if you have lost proprioceptive movements and say, hey, I can function again.
Yeah, that would be incredible.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, we're going to go to question and answer. I'll start on this side, and just so you folks know, if we run out of time, we're going to stick around a little bit afterwards. The congressman has to get on the road, but some of his staff is here as well, so myself or his staff can help answer questions that we don't get to. So I want to encourage that. Yes, please.
Great. Thank you, Congressman, for being here.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm an assistant professor in psychology and neuroscience here. So first of all, I just want to say it's great to have someone like you in Congress with this educational background in neuroscience, but also this real passion for advancing the future of neuroscience in our country. But since I'm starting off, I'll do kind of a lighthearted question, which is, with all that you've learned about psychology and neuroscience and sort of your educational background, how do you bring that with you to navigating some of these challenging environments that you've been in? We can debate if the SEALs or Congress is a more challenging one, but thank you.
I can answer that one really quick. It's my ability to articulate the two given spaces together to the members and the legislators that don't understand it. And I won't say necessarily put it, my first neuroscience class, I raised my hand. I was like, can you repeat that? And he was like, can you repeat what you just said? He's like, at what point? I was like, I just need you to put it in crayon for me. I have no idea what you're talking about. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but the rest of, there's not a lot of us that speak this, especially when it's psychology or neuroscience. So it's up to me to stand in front of them or sit with them and say, okay, hey, look, this is what this is. And I try to word that appropriately because, when we get on the computer and start talking neuroscience, the computer can't even keep up with it. I mean, it's red lines everywhere. Well, at least it was for me. So that's the way that I have to do it. But you have to, and it's frustrating as much, but you have to be patient. Because if you scare them off, it takes, I'm only one of 435. And I have to make sure that not only the lower chamber, but the upper chamber is going to respect if we start to connect the legislation, right? That's how that's going to have to work. So I have to be the voice. I like to say that I was bilingual when I speak military and I speak science, but now I have to be able to speak that as well. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hi, thank you for being here, Congressman. I grew up with what's called complex childhood trauma, so it's kind of abuse and neglect when I was a child when there were no mental health resources whatsoever.
Yes, ma'am.
I think it was through the military that it developed something called EMDR. Curious to get your impressions on that if you know about it. I was a healthcare lawyer in a past life as well, and I understand policy. Mental health parity. How does mental health and brain science kind of try to tie together? To me, they're very similar and go hand in hand, and I know Biden has some parity regulations that may or may not get done this year. But how do you see what you do with the brain science connecting to the mental health policy debate? My services are not covered whatsoever by my insurance.
So I'm a big fan of when we talk about mental health and legislation. I don't believe there needs to be a political agenda when we're talking about the mental health aspect of the American
Agreed,
public. Yeah. Okay, and this is Morgan talking. I'm not speaking for anybody else in the House of Representatives. Okay, this is just Morgan talking. Brain science and mental health, they have to coalesce. That's one figuring out the other. It's almost like a cross-functional team. One has to exist to have the other, and vice versa. As far as EMDR, the tricky part is every human being is different. Your brain is very beautiful. It's special. Hers is too. His is. And mine's different than everybody else's, even though it's damaged. If you were to put our head in a vice and hit his head and my head in the exact same spot with the exact same hammer, exact same pressure, his emotional and cognitive problem sets are going to be could be completely different than mine. So now we have to figure out where's the sweet spot. Where does the synergy live? And then you bring in at the legislative level in order to make that a possibility come true.
All right, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Hey, Congressman, it's good to see you. My name is R.W. Bray. I'm the State Relations Director for Senator Cruz. But on my military side, I've served 20 years. I'm a first sergeant in the United States Air Force. So my question is totally for the military side. I just finished serving a year and a half at Operation Lone Star. It seems as if there's this conversation around TBI when it comes to IEDs and things of the like, but we found recently that a lot of those that are having issues now are actually coming from heavy weaponry. Is there any conversation about in Congress about maybe creating sort of a full body mechanism to protect them from the ongoing onslaught
From
of
the
like
from
the
the
50
brisance
cal,
of the
for
blast?
example, maybe suppressors or things that are like that could stop that from happening?
So the answer to the question is yes. There was always, there's men like us and women like us that have come off the battlefield and have experienced these things, that come up with these brilliant ideas to better our soldiers moving forward, okay? The conversations are being had, but the tricky part is threading the needle on which one's most effective and efficient and proficient. You can't load a soldier, sailor, airman, Marine, Space Force. I gotta make sure I say them all.
Guardian,
yeah, Space Guardian, okay. Think about the dynamics of warfare, how we fought. You have to be able to shoot, move, and communicate. So you can't burden the body down with a weight unless you're gonna throw hydraulics into it, okay? I don't think we're anywhere specifically close to more or less like a cyborg outfit that will protect us from the brisance, the blasts from the brain that make the micro tears in our prefrontal lobes, or anywhere else, if you will. I haven't seen anything like that yet, unfortunately. Fortunately, but that doesn't mean it doesn't exist in a place that I haven't seen. Those places do exist.
thank you, Congressman.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for your service, both military and in Congress. Appreciate both of them. My question is actually related to something we haven't really touched on, which is the aging brain and some of the issues there. So kind of looking at, is any of the work that you're seeing or anything in the Neuroscience Caucus involved with how can we prolong or sustain brain activity and maybe prevent decline?
Yes, ma'am. Great question. So there was actually a program at the University of Texas at Dallas when I was there about anti-aging as far as the brain and the brain mechanism looks at. That is, so yes and no. There are universities, let me break this one out for you. There are systems of higher learning that are focusing in on that. I've had conversations with, I'm just going to say individuals that have, injection style, medication styles that say they reverse the aging of the body. They take the 90-year-old body has a 25-year-old brain. I don't know if you've heard kind of where I'm going with this. The price tag was in the millions, right? And I was like, that's not something I can bring out to Montgomery County or Harris County and share that with the masses. So there are things, from what I understand, that live in the aging brain that can possibly reduce. Now, nobody's handed me a profound research article that says, here's the sheer numbers. The end value was 400, and everybody that was 90 years old has now the functionality. The brain is flourishing again as it did when it was 14 to 24 years old. But the price tag of these treatments was astronomical. So nothing lives down here with the masses, unfortunately. And I don't know how that, I don't have a great answer on how that's really going to work right now until we have someone that the research can be replicated over and over again where we know it's 100% pure. Because this is what we're talking about here. This thing goes, we're done. So it's a great question. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Hi, Congressman. I'm a student here at the Baker Institute, and I'm particularly interested in public policy surrounding social media regulation, right? And I saw that, if I'm not mistaken, you recently voted yay on the TikTok resolution, right?
I did, yes, sir.
And I've heard the arguments as far as the national security concerns regarding it, but I'm curious from your perspective, there's also kind of a neuroscientist perspective that went into that decision to vote yay on that.
Well, since I'm a neuroscientist, every decision I make has got a little bit of that built into the cake. So for 5 days, when that vote was leading up, at the end of the week, that we were going to vote yes or no on the TikTok, okay? On average, we got about 500 calls in the office, to the district office and to the DC office. Phone would ring. And I'm a daddy, okay? I got a 7-year-old and an 11-year-old. And I hear you know, are you a daddy yet?
No.
Okay,
Sir.
great answer. Wait. You get to know what your babies sound like, yeah? And I would say the average age of the callers that week, the 500 calls, the average age of the caller was around from 12 to 15 years old, okay? And when they were activating their TikTok app, a screen would pop up. And it said, if you want to access TikTok, you have to call your representative and tell them to vote no. Here's the number. And our phone would ring. Now, in DC, we have a script we have to read. My staff is here with me today. They pick up the phone. Congressman Morgan Luttrell's office, thanks for calling. May I have your name? Thank you. May I have your address? Thank you. We have to ask these questions because every call is recorded. Now, the CCP controls TikTok, okay? So that's where your national security question goes. And that's a data aggregation minefield, right, that is sucking all that data in. Now, the CCP controlling TikTok put an app on the TikTok site that told a 12 to 15-year-old, call my office and give up their name and their address. Not their parents, a baby. Now, I want you to cast a real wide net in your mind. What else can an app do to a 12 to 15-year-old if they want to access TikTok that bad? And I had conversations with these babies. Someone was like, tell me what a congressman does. Don't get rid of TikTok. All my downloaded videos are on there. I had talked to members on the House floor. Like, we had calls. They said they were going to kill themselves because they couldn't access TikTok. An 18-year-old child right now, by the time they're 70, 75 years old, will spend 93% of their day, of their life, on a screen. So we don't want to get rid of TikTok. We want to get rid of CCP. We want to get rid of ByteDance. American company buys TikTok all day long. You can go forward and do great things. I think it's a great business marketing site, you know? But that's why I voted to get rid of TikTok, or to not get rid of TikTok, to move it from the CCP to an American-based company. And I mean, think, when you're a daddy one day, you're going to understand what it means when your baby, they were in school, you could hear the lockers slam, and you could hear them talking in the cafeteria. And here they are giving up this information. They shouldn't be doing that. And this is somebody from overseas telling them to do that. That's bad juju, sir.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
You bet. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you again for your service and for coming. I've seen information, it's just teasers from my point of view, I don't know the science, that particulate matter inhaled is contributing to Alzheimer's. Houston, and I'm sure many other cities, generate a huge amount of particulate matter from vehicles, construction, leaf blowers. Do you have any feel for this, know anything about it?
Are you talking about contaminants in relation to the aggressiveness of Alzheimer's?
Yes.
Okay. My depth is very shallow.
Mine too.
Does that sound right? My depth is very shallow?
You could be describing me, I'm not sure.
My information is very limited on, so contaminants lead to varying degrees of mental illness, cancers. That's a given. If there's an Alzheimer's expert in here, we can catch them after the fact, because that is definitely Alzheimer's, dementia. And I don't think we can actually appreciate how the trajectory looks when it comes to how aggressive contaminants are to not only genetically, non-genetically, any kind of disability is created in the brain or the body, okay? I know talking to my professors when I was going through grad school, is like the one thing that has gotten worse since the 70s. He asked me, he's like, hey, what has gotten worse since the 1970s that every single human being touches? And I was like, microwave oven? I was a stupid college student. Water. Water gets worse since the 70s. It's continuously gotten worse, and everybody consumes. And that's contaminated, right? There's years, loads. And I'm not, somebody's recording this, I'm not saying that is like the main issue, but there's a lot of it that goes into that problem set. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
And we'll do last question. I know you've got a kind of a tight...
Okay. There's two military. I can't say no to the military. People walk out of here, be like,
Well, Holly,
Morgan hates the military. Can't do that.
you'll answer to Holly afterwards.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
Thank you, Congressman, for being here, and I'd also like to thank you for your service. I really enjoyed your comments today. My name is Mitch Elkin, and I am a neurologist who specializes in taking care of patients with stroke, and now I work for the American Heart Association as the Chief Clinical Science Officer there. In the field of...
That's very impressive.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
That's very impressive.
I was going to say that over the past 20, 25 years or so, the change in paradigm in the world of stroke has been recognizing that we can actually reverse brain injury, but only if we treat the problem really urgently and get to people super quickly, within hours. We say time is brain, and we can reverse that damage if we can get to them right away. And I think about things like Alzheimer's disease, traumatic brain injury, which we kind of think of as long-term chronic problems, but I'm just wondering whether there's a way to shift the focus there to a greater sense of urgency as well. The longer we wait, the more damage occurs, the less likely people would be to respond to treatment. People with mental health issues, you wait too long, potentially suicide, becomes an issue. So my question to you is really, what can we do to try to change the perception about the urgency of brain disease and brain health, nationally? How can we change that conversation so people don't put it off?
That's a great question. So it's us changing the narrative that the brain, there seems to be this misconception if something happens in the brain, we're done. Well, it's just not the case. We can catch things early in the trajectory that lead up to a possible stroke. You really can't categorize a traumatic brain injury because of when the insult happens. But a few weeks ago was Brain Awareness Week in Washington, D.C., and I'm very involved in making a Brain Awareness Month. And that's us educating the public on what brain health is and more or less exposing, but initiating the American public into exactly what those little fundamental issues that may start happening. Hey, look, what is a stroke? Well, are you starting to lose your speech? Are you starting to go numb? How does that? Everybody knows what a heart attack is. My shoulder hurts. My chest is tight. So, okay, why can't we do that with a stroke patient, or to let people know, hey, there's a stroke? I saw a very interesting video the other day. A news reporter was having a stroke on TV. And she actually said, there's something happening to me right now. And she would have a phasic. She was going to phasic. Phasic, right? Did I say that right? Yep. Still got it. So that's us, in this room, and especially at my level. Right, again, hey, here's a new train of thought. All right, let's start educating the American public on the advancements of brain health, so we can walk those numbers back on the amount of strokes that we're having each year, and we can walk the number of individuals that are falling down into the post-traumatic stress disorder abyss. Or if you do have that problem set, how do we levitate you to a greater quality of life and decrease your symptomatic issues? But
thank you.
Go forward, do great things, sir. Thank you absolutely. Ma'am, yes, ma'am.
Good afternoon, sir. I'm a midshipman here at Rice, and I'm also a neuroscience and cognitive science major. I was wondering, what do you think is the most important intersection between the military and neuroscience, specifically for research? Should we be focused on psychedelics and TBI, like you said? Should it be mental health? And I was also wondering if you, in general, have advice for someone who's looking for an intersection between the military and neuroscience.
That's impressive. She actually had that all written down.
This is why Rice students scare me. They're that good, yes.
You want me to go ahead and start, or now
Yeah, you're hired. First of all, as a future officer, the fact you have something to write on and write with is perfect. The intersection between military and neuroscience is educating the leadership that baseline assessments and medical tracking of individuals' injury, deployment, to build up that portfolio for a service member that comes in, and when they exit and you're handed off to the VA, there's no surprises. Normally, the individuals that I dealt with before I was here were broken brains and bodies. I had nowhere to go with them. Again, I just had to increase their quality of life and decrease their symptomatic issues. We're no baseline assessment. So I think as a neuroscientist going into the military, you can talk intelligently on the importance of what brain health is, what physical health is, how those two come together, and the importance for your men and women in the services to have the ability to do that. Okay? Lead the way, young lady. Absolutely. There was 4 questions. And what was this? Lay one more on me.
Just general advice for someone looking for an intersection.
Create one. I
Yes, sir.
just tasked you.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, ma'am. All right, you're it, buddy.
Good morning, sir. Thank you for coming. I'm Midshipman Second Class Hartman, also from the Rice University Naval ROTC unit. You spoke about how your work on its implications of your work on veterans as they exit the military. I was wondering how the implications of your work on our military, specifically as it relates to their readiness, national security, and great power competition.
All right. Ask me the first part of that question again.
You spoke
ahead.
about the implications of your work on veterans as they exit the military. I was wondering the implications of your work on the current military as it relates to our readiness and relating to national security and great power competition.
Okay. My work with veterans, answer. I'm trying to put this together. If this is clear to everybody else, I'm still trying to populate how exactly.
I think he's asking about how neuroscience applies to those questions.
Is that it?
So you spoke about like veterans as they leave the military. I'm curious about
Okay, so
current military members and their relating to readiness.
So you're gonna realize this, and however long you stay in, the military is a bullet train traveling down the tracks. And nobody's going to be looking at you when you jump off because the train's not going to stop. All of my teammates that I served with rarely engage with me. They're still riding that train, given everything that's happened on globally, okay? And the problem with that is that the service members, when they transition into the veteran space, there's this deep, dark black hole. You're going to lose yourself for about 5 years. You have no idea. This is Morgan talking. Now imagine if you talk to the other veterans sitting here. I see this young man shaking his head too. He's probably going to agree with me. There's a miss. There's a loss on what you were, one of the most valuable assets the world has ever known because you're part of the United States military, to now I'm outside the military and I have no idea which direction I'm going, what I'm supposed to do. So my work when I deal with the veteran space is trying to communicate with the active duty space that you need to start this transitional period and you need to build up an infrastructure that offloads us just like you onboarded us. Because the suicide rates are off the charts. I mean, guys and gals get out into this. I mean, as a team guy, I got into the luckily I went into the neuroscience program. That was harder than being in teams. So I had something to focus in on. That doesn't happen to a lot of people, all right? And that's where my work, I'm trying to create that crossover where the transition from active duty service into the veteran space is more efficient, effective, and seamless. Because if you're 18 years old and you go into the military and you're in the military for 30 years, guess what you never did? You never had to buy your own clothes. You probably got to shop at the commissary. You had somebody tell you how to walk, talk, shoot, use the bathroom, everything. And before that, your parents did. And now you're an adult. You're a grown individual out in the real world, and who's going to do that for you? Nobody. Nobody. Here you were, an individual that was responsible for thousands of people that could make a call, take somebody's life, blow up a country, land a plane, or drive a ship. And then when you leave, there's nothing there, nothing. And you got to figure out how to be an adult with kids, with a spouse. And I'm trying to figure out how to make that seamless. Thank you for the question, though.
Thank you, sir.
If that was the question. If not, I just rattled off a pretty good answer, right?
Well, Congressman, thank you.
Thank y'all.